And right now what he does is photographs. He goes to Israel now and photographs.
All right, turn if you would to hymn number 136. 136. We're going to be kind of brief tonight because we want to give our special guest every minute that he possibly can. You know, when you have somebody here, you want to get every ounce out of them that you can. So we're looking forward to that. This is going to be our offertory hymn too. If two or three of y'all would usher, I appreciate that as we sing together here. Stand with us as we would. 136. Down at the cross where my Savior died, down where for cleansing from sin I cried, there to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name, glory to his name, glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his. I am so wondrously saved from sin. Jesus so sweetly abides within. There where he took me in. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. On the third, oh precious fountain that saves from sin, I am so glad I have entered in. There Jesus saves me and keeps me clean. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. On the last, come to this fountain so rich and sweet. Cast thy poor soul at the Savior's feet. Plunge in today and be made complete. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. I'll remind y'all on Wednesday nights our special mission offering is going to Brother Tucker. Tucker will be leaving here May 31st or May 30th, and he'll be going to Guatemala. So we've enjoyed him, and he's been a great blessing to us, and I know we want to be a blessing. So if you have your tithe or whatever, the counting people know where all that goes, but anything that's just left or whatever goes to missions there for Brother Tucker. Let's pray together. Amen. You can be seated. Sing this with me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, 'twas have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace 'twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first begun, when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amen. All right, let me make a couple of announcements just to make sure that, because things are a little different tonight. We've got a very special guest with us. I think you're going to be totally blessed. But before we do, don't forget tomorrow, Hilltoppers, 10 a.m., entrance B, and we'll be going to pick some strawberries, or some of us don't want to get out there and kneel over. We'll go buy strawberries. And up at Eford Farms, and all kinds of vegetables and everything up there you want. And then we'll be crossing over to Hughes Springs to the Wildflower Inn to have lunch together. And so we'll take that, and then we'll be back in the afternoon. So remember that tomorrow, 10 a.m. in the entrance B. Also Friday, about 8:30, let's say 8 o'clock, we'll let the schools kind of get in. We're going to set the woods on fire Friday at 8 o'clock. I know we were trying to do that, and it kept raining and off and on and off. But this Friday is going to be good. It's going to be a great day, and we're going to set the woods on fire. And smoke will be going. I'm telling you, there's one way. We're going to have smoke one way or the other. It won't be in the auditorium here, but it'll be out there in the back 40 there. So remember, those two things are very important. And don't forget, this week is our Memorial Day picnic, Sunday, 4 o'clock. A little different timing and all than we usually have. We're going to begin the service right at 4 o'clock, and Tucker is going to be preaching, and then we'll have music, and Tucker will be preaching, and then we're going to license Tucker, and then we're going to enjoy pulled pork sandwiches that are home smoked, and hamburgers and hot dogs and hot links, and then y'all are bringing everything else. It's going to be a great day. And then we can play 42 until the Lord comes. I mean, there's just last one out, turn out the lights, and there'll be volleyball going on. The kids have the bounce houses and a wet slide. And incidentally, the slide is rated for adults too. So if you adults want to go down that thing, let us know, and we'll get a picture. Picture says 1,000 words. Amen. We were playing ball out here. They got me suckered in the academy Monday. And has anybody seen the video? Y'all did? Is it on Facebook? Is that my picture is? Well, there's a video there of I'm pitching the ball, and I'm getting ready to catch this ball. There's no problem. It's a big ball. I'm fixing to catch it. My son knocks the living daylights out of me. I roll twice over, and he catches the ball and becomes a hero. And I said, son, the paybacks are tough. That's all I can tell you. They're tough. But anyway, if you want to go down that slide, brother, we'll let you go down it, and we'll take a picture, a movie of it, and we'll face it. That could be America's funniest home videos. Who knows what it might be. Thank y'all so much for being here tonight. This is a good crowd for this last week of school. It's been a hectic time around here this week. But we're thankful that you're here. Tonight we have Brother Bob Rucker with us, and Bob is are you retired? Or just never, okay. It's not biblical. I agree totally. I'm right there with you, I guarantee you. And I'll let him explain all about it, but he is going to be showing us and just some research. He's done this for, 25, 30 years? 10 years on the shroud. But I think you're going to be just impressed with what he's got. So after the service, now, you know, we've got buses and we got kids and youth and the choir and all that, and the buses have to run. But if you don't have anywhere to go, Bob will stay here as long as you want to stay. And there'll be a question and answer time. I see some people know Bob back there, and they're saying, yep, y'all last one out, turn out the lights there. So Bob, come and make yourself at home. Thank you and your wife for being here with us tonight.
Just being here, it's wonderful. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation. Well, my wife and I are from Richland in Washington, state of Washington, and my son lives here in Longview. So twice a year we try and get down here to visit my son and his family. So that's what this is part of. So tonight we're going to be going into the Shroud of Turin, and as you see there, my website is shroudresearch.net, shroudresearch.net for network. Shroud is spelled S-H-R-O-U-D. And I give my email there as well, robertarucker@yahoo.com. And we're just going to try this, make sure it works, okay? Yeah, so I earned a bachelor's and master's degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Michigan. I have to go into this a little bit because we're going to be getting into some technical details. So you'll want to know my qualifications on the technical side here for this. Received a bachelor's and master's degree in nuclear engineering from University of Michigan, and then went into the nuclear industry for 38 years, where I did nuclear analysis, computer calculations, and statistical analysis of measurement data, primarily to do nuclear reactor design and what's called criticality safety. And after finishing, glad to be done with that, move on to another project, never retire though. Next project was, I've spent 10 years now on studying the Shroud of Turin, and there's a reason for that, because the two items I noted above, the nuclear analysis computer calculations and the statistical analysis of measurement data, you don't have to understand what all that means, but it's almost like someone had their hand on me preparing me to do Shroud research, because those two items that I worked on for 38 years are exactly what I used to do Shroud research. So I've now written 33 papers on the Shroud of Turin, and those are on my website, shroudresearch.net. If you go over to the third page, it's labeled as research, and I list my 33 papers that I've written on the subject. 6 years ago now, my wife and I and my daughter organized the International Conference on the Shroud of Turin at the very large track facility in Pasco, Washington. That would be in 2017. We had researchers come. It was a 4-day conference. It was a big deal. We had researchers come from Italy, Spain, France, Mexico, Canada, Australia, and the United States. And they made 28 researchers, 4 days. We had between 200 and 300 people in attendance at that conference, major conference. And my goal is to explain the mysteries of the Shroud of Turin. Always been fascinated by trying to explain mysteries. Isn't that interesting? Whether mathematical or of any nature. Now, these are two pictures of the tomb. On the left is as you would see, a tomb like Jesus would have been buried in. This is a rolling stone tomb. You can see the large rolling stone there. And they are typically of a certain design. This is carved into the limestone in a cliff formation there, a little bit of a hill behind it. So there's lots of limestone in Jerusalem. And then on the inside, you've probably never seen the inside of a tomb. I had to search for this one. But this shows a left bench, a right bench, and a back bench. Okay, left bench, right bench, and a back bench here with a couple steps leading up to it. Also, this is interesting. You see this little doorway here? The Jewish burial was done in 2 phases. They'd bring the body in, wrap it in cloth, and leave it for 1.5 years to 2 years until the flesh rotted away. They'd come back in for phase 2. They'd collect the bones, put them into what's called an ossuary, a stone box basically, And then they would move it down into this area, a storage area down here, next to the ancestors' bones that were placed here. So in the Old Testament, when it refers to being gathered to your ancestors, that's what it's referring to. Moving the bones down in next to your ancestors' bones. So in John chapter 20, verses 5 to 7 in the NIV, both, referring to Peter and John, were running. You remember this? The women had tried to go into the tomb to finish the burial process on phase 1. And when they found that there was no body there, they ran to the disciples. So both Peter and John were running, but the other disciple, John, outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in. That would be at a distance. Okay, now there's no skylight, there's no windows. You can't turn on the electric lights in the tomb. So in order for him to see into the tomb, he had to be well back from the doorway to allow the light in. And so what he saw the burial cloths there. So that meant that the burial took place on the back bench in the tomb. So he wouldn't see the left or the right bench. So the body was on the back bench, a little note there. Lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there. Let me explain this a little bit. The Greek word here is hathania, and it was used up previously as well. Hathania is a plural word, and both the New King James and the NIV include the phrase strips of. Now, there's no word in the Greek that explicitly says strips. So where is this strips of coming from? It's coming from hathania, and the translators of hathania thought that hathania required it to be strips. But in going to BibleGateway.com, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but this is one of the best places to go for translations. There's 52 English translations of the New Testament on BibleGateway.com. So I went there and looked up in each of these 52 different translations, how many included the word strips of, and there were 10. 42 did not. So that tells me, and some of the other Greek resources that are available also imply here that hathania can be used even for large sheets of linen. So really the better translation would be pieces of linen. I'm trying to get away from this idea of strips. Strip is a long, narrow piece, but it can refer to an entire sheet of linen as well. So as well as the cloth, so they observed the pieces of linen on the back bench, but also the cloth, that is the sudarion, we've changed the word now, that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. This would be the head or the face cloth. It could be translated either way. The cloth was still lying in its place. That's referring to the sudarion. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen, the hathania. Finally, the other disciple, that would be John, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. Now, here's the key verse. He saw and believed. I wish there had more explanation here. Now, what did he believe? Now, fortunately, we have the next verse here, and the NIV puts it in parentheses. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. So in other words, what he believed is explained in verse 9. He believed that Jesus was risen from the dead, that what he saw indicated the resurrection. He's the first person to realize the resurrection of Jesus. Now, you remember, so we have verses 8, 9, and 10 in Isaiah 53. Verse 8 talks about his death. Verse 9 talks about his burial. Verse 10 talks about him being alive after his death. Well, that requires the resurrection, doesn't it? And then in the New Testament, Jesus prophesied his own resurrection probably 6 or 7 times. But they missed it. How could they miss it? It's so clear to us. When Jesus said, I will rise again, it's clear to us he's talking about his resurrection. But realize that the Jews in that day had a different idea about the Messiah. The Messiah had to come and destroy their enemies, which would be Rome, and establish his millennial kingdom, ruling from the throne of David, literally in Jerusalem. So there was none of this business of Messiah dying on the cross. Can't have that. He has to rule from the throne of David. They didn't understand that there was two comings. The first coming here was for him to die as Savior of the world. The second coming would be to come as the Jews' Messiah. Now, the question is, that's what he believed. He came to realize just rationally, sorting it out. But the question then is, what did he see? Well, would he have seen the limestone on the inside of the tomb? Well, yes, but that's unremarkable. He would have seen Peter there. That's unremarkable. What would have convinced him that Jesus was resurrected? It's the nature of the burial cloths that he saw. Resurrection take place, the cloths collapse, so that the cloths were not, taken back by people who stole the body. It was not that Jesus awoke from crucifixion, just revived in the cool of the tomb, and then unwrapped himself. No, he just saw the collapsed cloth and realized that Jesus wasn't speaking figuratively or allegorically when he was making reference to rising again. He was talking literally. So it's John that makes this first connection based upon the burial cloth of Jesus. Now, so we have three different words in. Joseph of Arimathea bought the cloth called the Sindon. Now that's interesting because what I've been doing for the last 10 years is called Sindonology, study of the burial cloth of Jesus. I'm a Sindonologist for the last 10 years. But once a nuclear engineer, always a nuclear engineer. Would always claim to be that as well. And then we have Hathonia, multiple pieces of linen used for burial. So that would refer to the burial cloth and probably tie strips that were mentioned. Now, probably not tied on at that point because you remember the women were coming back on the following Sunday morning to finish phase one. And then there's the sudarion, a cloth that was around his head. That is the face or head cloth. Now, this is a picture of the sudarion. How many have seen this before? Have you seen this before? This is the sudarion, the face or head cloth. This is believed to be authentic. Okay? And this is located in Oviedo, Spain. It arrived with documentation that it left Jerusalem about sometime after 570 AD, and it's been in Oviedo, Spain since 840 AD. Just amazing. It's 33 inches by 21 inches. There's no image on it, but it does have blood stains, as you can see, that matches, to a degree, matches the blood stains on the body cloth. That is what I believe now to be the Shroud of Turin. So, when they brought Jesus in and they put his body on the back bench, they would have laid him down on the back bench already on the back section of the cloth, half of the body cloth. The person doing the burial would then reach over and take this face cloth off of his face and lay it aside because that I just showed you does not have an image on it. And then they lay the body cloth over the top. Now, so you notice the body cloth went from the heels up the back, up and over his head, down the front to his toes. It wasn't wrapped like an Egyptian mummy. Totally different. It's wrapped up over his head. Now, this makes it an easy process to do. Now, the question is, that was real, wasn't it? Jesus was buried in a long piece of cloth. What happened to it? When Peter and John went in, John, at least, recognized that this is his burial cloth. Peter would have known it was his burial cloth as well. What happened to it? Did they reuse it? Do you think that's possible? Did they burn it? Did they throw it out? Did they leave it to be confiscated by the Jewish leaders or by the political rulers? What would have happened to it? People are collectors, right? They would have saved this to help them remember things about Jesus in order maybe to show it to others. It had Jesus' blood on it. How important is Jesus' blood in the theology of salvation? Pretty important. They would have saved this. So where is it? Where would you expect it to be today? Well, given church history, you would expect it to be, in some sense, associated with the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? Now, we're going to move on here. It has been in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, since 1578. Now, this is the man, Secondo Pia, that took the first photo of this piece of cloth in 1898. And there's his camera that you can see there that he used. And that camera is in the museum in Turin, Italy, to this day. And the amazing thing here that he took the first photographs of this piece of cloth. And then he took the large glass plate that the light came in and exposed on his glass plate. He was developing it in his fixer in the darkroom. And you could see the image start to come up. Now, what did he expect to see? Now, the face that could be seen on the Shroud of Turin is kind of a blurry, not a real good clear resolution image. So he expected to see a negative image of that blurry image. Instead, when he held it up, he was so shocked, he almost dropped it. What he saw was a good resolution, positive image. Okay? Now, when I look at you, your nose is out in front of your face, reflecting the light, and so it's bright. And you probably can see my nose is bright. My eyes, your eyes, are darker because they're under the eyelids. So dark eyes, bright nose. On the image, it's just the reverse. So the image is negative on the cloth. Now, that told Secondo Pia that cloth is not a painting, because it was shown in 1356 as the burial cloth of Jesus, and then it gradually made its way with well-known history down to the Shroud of Turin in 1578. So in 1356, no one would have seen a negative image. They wouldn't know what that is. So it couldn't possibly be a painting, because no one had seen a negative image. So Secondo Pia is the first one to realize here that this is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus, I think. So there it is. This is the image of the face. Now you see, the nose is bright, the eyes are dark. So this is the photographic negative, which shows the positive image of his face. Photographic negative of the face. Now that negative that we see right there, then there was such persecution on the church between 44 AD and I think it was 362 AD, that at one point this piece of cloth was hidden. In the church in Antioch, they evidently had a keeper of the treasures. And the word had gotten out to the emperor in Rome that in Antioch, in the church, they had the burial cloth of Jesus. And the emperor wanted it. He sent his agent down, found this keeper of the treasures, and tortured him to reveal where it was located. He wouldn't tell because he had hidden it. The only one that knew where it was. And so they killed him. So no one knew where it was at that point until in Antioch there were 2 floods and a fire that destroyed much of the city. So they were rebuilding the walls and they came to one niche above one gate. They opened that up and this is what they found. And this would be about 525 AD. So at that point, there started to be paintings of the Jesus with the image from the Shroud of Turin. So you see here on the Shroud of Turin, you see hair parted in the middle, hair a little bit longer on one side than the other, mustache, beard, long nose, large dark eyes, looking straight at you. And that's what the painting is. Same qualities. So they copied this about 1550 or 600 AD. This is called the Christ Pantocrator image. They copied this from the Shroud of Turin, and then in Byzantine iconography, they repeated to copy it with all those characteristics. So that then about 692, it was the emperor recognized that this was such a prized item. He took his image off the coins and put the image from the Shroud of Turin on, starting in 692. This would be a gold Salatus. I have one at home of this. So that when we look at our concept of what Jesus looked like, you recognize this? I was talking to the children, and I said, "Who is this?" They said, "That's Jesus." I said, "How do you know?" One little boy raised his hand. I called on him. And he said, "Because it looks like him." Well, that's good reasoning. It looks like him. It looks like the image that we have in our mind of what Jesus looked like. Why do we have this image in our mind? Because of the face on the Shroud of Turin. So the face on the Shroud of Turin has been on the cover of Time magazine in April 1998. It's been on the cover of U.S. News and World Report in March 2002. The high point is this National Geographic from June of 1980, because it has a 24-page article on the shroud, including a beautiful 4-page fold-out. Show it to you here. Beautiful 4-page fold-out of the Shroud of Turin with the front image here, head down to the feet, the back image, turn it over, from the head down to the feet here. You can look at this later if you want to. You can, by the way, you can get these on the internet for $3 or $4 plus shipping. More recently, it was in the magazine 100 Greatest Mysteries, and they dedicated 1 page to the Shroud of Turin. But of course, now the Shroud of Turin is not just a face. It's a complete, full-size, front and back image of a man that was crucified exactly like Jesus was crucified, according to the New Testament. So according to ancient tradition, this is the burial cloth of Jesus. Well, I'm a scientist, that's my background. Could that possibly be true? Initially, I thought that can't possibly be true, because everyone would know it. It would be so popular, so revered, everyone would know about the Shroud of Turin. But then, thinking about it a little bit later, I thought, no, I have to be a little bit more open-minded than that. So when I saw a copy of a book in the bookstore about the Shroud of Turin, I bought it and read it, then another one, etc. So the top image here shows two, let's see if we can, two long scorch marks right there and down here, scorch marks, because it was in a fire in 1532 when the church caught fire. It was folded up inside a wooden box covered in silver. So evidently one corner burned, so we know the temperature that it reached because we know the melting point of silver, and dropped down on the folded shroud, burnt one corner, so that therefore it ended up with 16 different patches that had to be put on 2 years later in 1534. The bottom image here is a photograph of the top image. The top image is how it would look if you went to Turin to look at it. The bottom image is a photographic negative which reverses the light and dark areas and reverses it left to right. But what photography does is that it enhances the contrast to allow you to see it. So the front image here, you can see the puncture wounds up here, swollen cheek and nose, 2-inch wide elliptical wound over here where they thrust the Roman thrusting spear, and you can see a hole just about the size of a Roman thrusting spear with blood and water, the Bible says, coming down. It's actually clear blood serum, which would be mostly water. Okay, and blood running down the arms, consistent with the arms being up in a crucified position. You can actually see 2 different angles of blood flow here, consistent with him moving up and down on the cross in order to breathe, thus creating 2 different angles on the arms with the blood flowing down in 2 different angles. Just amazing. You notice that the nail is not through the wrist as all the Middle Age paintings are, because they didn't, when the Bible says that the nail went into his hand, it's not usually realized that the hand in Jewish culture goes down to about the midpoint of the forearm, so that this would be the hand as well. So that this does not support sufficient weight because there's no bone structure above it. This going between the bones, not breaking any bones, but going between them supports the weight. And in putting it here then collapses the thumbs when it crushes the nerve that comes through here. Notice how painful that would be. But All the paintings from the Middle Ages get it wrong. They show the nails in the palms and the thumbs prominent. The Shroud of Turin gets it right, through the wrist with the thumbs folded over. You see 120 different scourge marks, nose and knee abrasions indicating one or more falls. Did he fall? Yes, he did. And the side strip is sewn on. You notice this little seam right here? For some reason, this was cut off and then reattached, possibly after removing some material. But the stitch that sews that on is a unique stitch, most similar to a stitch found at Masada, that was where Masada was destroyed in 73 to 74 AD. And this seam is very similar to the one found on a piece of cloth at Masada, thus dating this cloth to the 1st century. This is one of the best ways to date it, believe it or not. So the back image has puncture wounds. What would that be from? A cap of thorns, not just a crown, but a cap that was then beat onto his head. Abrasions on the shoulders, on each shoulder, abrasions on both shoulders from carrying a rough, heavy object. What would that be from? Cross, of course. About 120 scourge marks, flow of blood from the side wound across the small of the back, 2 nails through 1 foot. They put this nail through the heel, and then they force this foot over the top of this foot, and then put 1 nail through both, according to the evidence right here, so that this foot could not rotate because it had 2 nails in it, but this foot could rotate to allow him to push up and down on the cross to breathe. They didn't want him to die too quickly, you know. Just amazing, the cruelty. This is a piece of cloth at 32 magnification at the small of the back, showing Jesus' blood and showing the 3-to-1 herringbone weave of this piece of cloth. The 3-to-1 herringbone weave is a difficult weave to do and much more expensive, which is why Joseph of Arimathea is specifically mentioned to be a very wealthy man. He had the money to buy this. Increase the magnification to 64 power. This is on the tip of the nose where the image is the strongest. Look at it closely. Do you see the image? No, you don't. You're too close. Okay? You have to be back about 8 to 10 feet, it's usually said, in order to actually see the image. If it's a painting, you see it better if you get up close, but not with the Shroud of Turin. So this is the tip of the nose. And the image, you see this right in here? You see the little color differences here? A little bit of color differences here? You see that? That's where the image is located. It's a straw yellow or light sepia color that the top 2 or 3 layers of fibers in a thread have been discolored with this color. And it's that discoloration of the fibers that makes the front and back images of a man that was crucified exactly like Jesus was crucified. How in the world do you do that? Okay, this was the puzzle. How do you create an image of a crucified man with this type of foundation to it? Fascinating, fascinating. Now, the Shroud of Turin is made from the stems of the long flax plant. Historically, it had to start in Jerusalem, and then before Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. If you know any date, know that one. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. It was evidently taken down to Antioch at this location, from which it could be taken up to Edessa, Turkey, for when the king of Edessa wanted to convert to Christianity during a few years when the persecution had been lifted. And then evidently the shroud was also taken over here to Turkey, to the Galatia area. And I'll read a verse from Galatians regarding that. It then went up to Constantinople, was there for hundreds of years. And I'm indicating the path here because with dash lines because I don't know the path, but we know certain locations. It was then taken up to Lorraine, France, and shown as the burial cloth of Jesus in about 1355 or 56. It was then taken down across France Chambry, where the fire was located, was right about there. It was then taken into Turin, Italy in 1578. This is the cathedral where it's currently located. This was taken in 1978. It's Turin or Torino. The Olympics were held there several years back. But this picture was taken in 1978 when the shroud was on exhibit. It only goes on exhibit a few times a century. There's a rumor it's going to go on exhibit again in 2025. And we're hoping that a decision maker in the Vatican, meaning the Pope, will allow scientists to go in, follow in the exhibition, and do further experiments on it. The last time this was done was following this exhibit. In 1978, they allowed the Shroud of Turin Research Project to come to Turin, Italy, and do 5 days, 24 hours a day of any non-destructive experiment that they wanted to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what about Galatians 3:1? O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified. Let's look at this closely now. Before whose eyes, okay, so that they saw something, Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed in some way among you as crucified. So that's what was being portrayed, Jesus Christ as crucified. Now, was clearly portrayed. What's the Greek word there? Prographo. Now, you see the grapho there, grapho. You think of photograph or just a graphic. Well, what's a graphic? Okay, it's something that's held up in front of a person with some type of a picture or something on it, maybe words on it, held up before people to communicate a message. And that's what Paul's referring to. The message that was being communicated to them was Jesus Christ's crucifixion. So what would this be referring to? I would suggest to you it was referring to the Shroud of Turin. Now, it doesn't say that because they were trying to keep it hidden. So any reference to it was a very oblique reference that where we would know what it refers to, but the authorities who wanted to confiscate it would not. Okay, so it was being dealt with in kind of a hidden fashion to protect it. So I think this is probably a reference to what we now call the Shroud of Turin. So what are the mysteries that I'm trying to solve? Well, first of all, the front and dorsal image of the crucified man. How were they formed? Secondly, the carbon dating of 1260 to 1390. Does that mean when carbon dating dates it to that age range, does that mean it's just not authentic? Is that where you stop? Just accept it? I didn't. Okay? I have 38 years in nuclear engineering. When I first read the paper that reported this, at that point I had 19 years experience in designing nuclear reactors. So I had the background to understand what was going on here. And I looked at it, at the document, read it over, thought about it for about 2 minutes, and I said, this isn't right. Okay. I couldn't do anything about it at that point because I was very busy doing my work in nuclear engineering. I didn't have a computer fast enough to do the work, and what was it? Oh, I didn't have time to do it. So that had to all wait. And then the third mystery is the blood on the shroud. Why is the blood on the shroud? Blood that had dried on the body wouldn't absorb into a piece of cloth. So why is it on the cloth now? You see the problem? So we have these three different mysteries. Now, the Shroud of Turin Research Project was led by this man, John Jackson, a PhD in physics. He was a professor at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And he led a team of 26 individuals to Turin, Italy, to investigate the shroud. Here he is looking at the cloth with a high-powered microscope. So their conclusions. The image is not due to paint, dye, or stain. That's the first thing they investigated. No pigment, no binder, no brush strokes, no clumping of fibers or threads, no stiffening of the cloth, no cracking of image along fold lines. All those would be evident if it was due to paint, dye, or stain. Next, they checked it for capillarity, that soaking up of a liquid. Did it soak up liquid? And they said no. The discoloration on the fibers does not soak in to the next fiber. Okay? So the image is not due to any liquid, such as an acid. Next, they thought maybe it's a scorch. So they turned off the lights, brought up a black light emitting ultraviolet light so that any scorch would then fluoresce. That is, it would absorb the higher energy ultraviolet light and then re-emit that light down in a wavelength that we could see at a lower energy. And so all the scorch marks from the fire in 1532 fluoresced, but the image did not. So the image is not due to contact with a hot object. It's also not a photograph because there were no light-sensitive chemicals found on the image, and the image contains three-dimensional information in the image. Now, no normal photograph or painting does this, but the Shroud of Turin includes three-dimensional information. Satellite telemetry data also does. So the Shroud of Turin is similar to satellite telemetry data in that sense. Very interesting. Now, wow, nature of the images, full-size images on the front and back of a man crucified exactly as Jesus was crucified. Images, I have a fairly good resolution of a couple millimeters, I'd say. Images are vertical projections from the body. The front image is a vertical projection upward from the body. The back image is a vertical projection downward from the body, just geometrically. And that gives us a clue as to how the images were formed. Also, there's no image of the side of the body or the top of the head. And the images are negative with light and dark areas reversed. And the images, as I just mentioned, contain 3D or topographical information. Now, what is the nature of this information? This information that's encoded into the image reflects the vertical distance from the body to the cloth. Because you can back out a statue from the two-dimensional image on the cloth. Absolutely fascinating. So the images are caused by the discolored fibers. But it's only the top 2 or 3 layers of fibers that are discolored. The discoloration is all the way around the circumference, the outer circumference of the fibers, only a thickness of less than 0.2 micrometers, whereas the diameter of a linen fiber is about 15 micrometers. It's about 1/5 the diameter of a human hair. So we're talking this discoloration is extremely thin all the way around the outside. How do you do that? What would cause that? This would be the question that I'd always answer. I'd look at the evidence, and then I'd ask the question, what would cause that? Next thing you investigate is in that extremely thin layer on the circumference of the fiber, what is it actually that's causing the discoloration? Well, the carbon atom has 6 electrons in it, but 2 electrons in the inner orbit, 4 electrons in the outer orbit. So the way it usually connects to the surrounding atoms is it connects to 4 surrounding atoms, 1 electron going to each. And so I have little lines here indicating 1 electron going to each of the 4 surrounding atoms. But in that discolored region, what we have is we have single bonds going to atoms here, but we have a double bond going to the atom here. So in other words, the discoloration is due to the single electron bonds going to double electron bonds, which causes the carbon atom to vibrate differently. So if light comes in, bounces off, the light bounces off differently, which we then see as a different color. That's what's causing the discoloration. On the fibers, top 2 or 3 layers of fibers on a thread that contains about 100 different fibers, that causes the image of a crucified man on the Shroud of Turin. Absolutely amazing. And we need to note that it's not due to any substance added to the cloth. These atoms were already in the cloth. It's just a rearrangement of the atoms in the cloth that were already in the cloth. So let me just talk through my hypothesis for image formation. Now, this took me many years to develop, and we don't have many years to go over the whole process of doing this. Okay, so what I'm saying here, my conclusion here is that an extremely brief, intense burst of vertically collimated, that's all upward. You need that in order to create the good resolution image. If what was coming out was like this, then you just end up with chaos. because every point on the cloth would be receiving information from many different points. That would just cause a blur. So you have to have a vertically collimated radiation. Now, why bring in radiation at this point? Because radiation is the primary means of transferring information. Now, when you look at me, why do you see me? When I look at you, why can I see you? It's because of radiation. So in other words, what are these up here? These are photon emitters, okay? You would call them lights. I call them photon emitters, okay? So we have photons being emitted, filling the room with, a photon is the smallest packet of light energy. So we have photons filling the room, bouncing off everything, bouncing off in all different directions. So when you're sitting there, these photons, you don't feel them, of course, but they bounce off you in all directions, some of which go to my eyes. And those reflected photons carry your color to my eyes on the energy that they have. They carry, whether it's dark or light, that is the shade, based upon how many there are, and then depending on how that photon goes through the lens of my eye and which rod it falls on, that indicates the location. So we have color, shade, and location from all of you is coming to my eyes so that I can see all of you. So that it's information that's primarily involved in transferring information. So that, did you like that? Did you know that? Ever think about that before? You usually think, well, I just open my eyes and if there's light, I see, right? But that's what's going on. It's almost like we were specially designed. Well, absolutely wonderfully made. Yes, absolutely. We can go into that more, but we could talk on that topic for a long time. So that the vertically collimated radiation was emitted in the body that was within this cloth, was emitted in the body. And this probably consisted of charged particles that rapidly oscillated between vertically up and vertically down, so that it would shoot protons off, up, down, and down, up, and down. So it would form the front and back image simultaneously as we go through this vertical oscillation. And this all falls out, in my thinking, from the evidence that's on the shroud. Rapidly oscillating between vertically up and vertically down, causing a static discharge from the top fibers that were facing the body like a thundercloud going over terrain on the ground with lightning rods. So where you have the minimum distance, that's where the lightning occurs. So we're saying that there was little lightning bolts between the cloth and the body that discolored the fibers due to a high frequency alternating current in the fibers. This gets so technical, that's why I'm just reading it. That deposited heat in the thin 0.2 micrometer outer layer to discolor it around the circumference of the fibers. That's my solution to what formed the image. Absolutely amazing. Very complex, because the information, the scientific information from the shroud is complex. And that's why this has taken me 10 years to develop this solution to how the images were formed. Now, there's also the question about the carbon dating. Does the carbon dating that was done on the shroud in 1988 disprove the authenticity of the shroud? And I say, no. When you understand the details of it, it actually proves it to be authentic. It's just, I've taken the evidence, investigated it so thoroughly, that I've turned the conclusion right on its head. So instead of the carbon dating disproving the shroud's authenticity, in my thinking now and what I'm promoting is that it actually proves it. So we had samples sent to laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and at the laboratory in Tucson, Arizona. And you can see they took that sample, cut it into smaller pieces, and submitted subsamples for dating. So that's what the dates that we have here. I'm listing these dates, AD. So the first one, 1155 plus or minus 65. Well, what is plus or minus 65? What does that mean? Well, that's the uncertainty on this 1155. And this plus or minus 65, the uncertainty, it is what's called a 1 sigma uncertainty, or a 1 standard deviation uncertainty, which means that if this is true, then about 68% there'd be a 68% probability of having the true value fall within this range of 1155 to plus or minus 65. A little bit of detail, you don't have to understand that thoroughly. But anyway, so what we have here were 3 samples from Oxford, 5 from Zurich, 4 from Arizona, 12 altogether that were measured. So if you just add up these values and divide by 3, add up these values, divide by 5, add up these values, divide by 4, you get these values, which then if you add those up, divide by 3, you get 1260 plus or minus 31 AD for the Shroud of Turin, which then needs to be corrected for the changing carbon-14 concentration in the atmosphere, which they do based upon tree ring counting, believe it or not. And so it's often quoted as a range from 1260 to 1390. But if this is true, then that disproves the authenticity of the Shroud. So we have a conflict. How do we resolve the conflict? We go into more detail. The devil's always in the detail. So if I look at these values, the first thing you do in analyzing experimental data is you do a statistical analysis on the dates and the uncertainties, including the uncertainties, to see if the data is consistent with one another. In other words, we had 3 samples cut right next to each other from the corner of the Shroud and sent to these 3 different laboratories. Those pieces were cut as close as possible to each other, only about that far from each other, because that's the size of these samples that were sent. So they should be the same. They should be consistent with one another. But when I do a chi-squared statistical analysis on this data, what I find is that there's a 99% probability that there's an unknown factor that's affecting these measurements. There's only about a 1% chance that these values are consistent with one another. So something strange is going on. Well, as soon as I say that these values are not consistent with one another, it's kind of like, for example, Oxford here, 3 different samples. It's like those 3 different dates are coming from different pieces of cloth. Well, if you had 3 different pieces of cloth and you do carbon dating on each one, would you just average the values and divide by 3? No, you wouldn't. So in other words, as soon as you realize that these values aren't consistent, it's not legitimate to simply add the 3 values and divide by 3, add the 5 values, divide by 5, add the 4 values and divide by 4. That's not correct. And it's not correct to take these 3 values, add them up and divide by 3 to get that value. So the only option, as soon as you do your, it's a technical bit. It took me maybe half a day to do. This isn't exactly what I focus on in my career, but I've done this many times. Do a chi-squared, it's a rather simple calculation, really. And you do the chi-squared statistical analysis on this to show that the data is inconsistent. The only option then is to throw out the data. And that's the conclusion. This whole experiment, all the data, should just be rejected. Now, what that means is you give it no credibility at all. So that's how I deal with it. Well, what would cause this? What is this mysterious factor that's causing this change? The one solution that I've come up with, you remember? The image was formed by protons emitted from the body. Where do protons come from? They come from the atoms in your body. But if protons are emitted, neutrons also would be. My solution to this problem of carbon dating is neutrons were emitted along with the protons, which were then absorbed in nitrogen-14 in the cloth. And when a nitrogen-14 absorbs a neutron, it kicks out a proton and changes to carbon-14, which is what's being measured in carbon dating. So the neutron absorption is shifting the carbon date forward. So instead of dating to 33 AD, which it ought to, it dates to 1260 because of neutron absorption in the cloth. Wow. And there we have it in red. Nitrogen 14 plus a neutron goes to carbon 14 plus a proton. So who is this? There's 2 criteria to decide who this is. He died by crucifixion exactly like Jesus died by crucifixion. And number 2, an extremely brief, intense burst of radiation from his dead body produced the front and back images of his body and the cloth and shifted the carbon date forward. So who, in all the documents that we have as human beings that we can refer to, you can look through them all, and there's only one person and one event that this could refer to: Jesus and his resurrection. So his resurrection was not only a disappearance of the body from within the burial cloth, but it was a nuclear event where an extremely small fraction of the neutrons and protons in his body were emitted. Well, what fraction? I calculated that. 1 neutron in 10 billion in his body were emitted to shift the carbon date from 33 AD to 1260 AD. And that's only satisfied by Jesus in his resurrection. So the evidence for Jesus' resurrection that's always been quoted has related to context. That is, Old Testament prophecy would lead us to believe in the resurrection, and Jesus' predictions of his own resurrection would lead us to believe in the resurrection. But there's also eyewitness testimony regarding the empty tomb and the post-resurrection appearances. But in our previous arguments and evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, we've never had physical or circumstantial evidence until now. And that's the significance of the Shroud of Turin. It provides a new category of evidence, scientifically based evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Wow, right on time. That's pretty good, isn't it? So,
if you need to go, okay, you're welcome to go, but we're welcome to have questions and answers, and choir can go around us or do whatever. Some of them may want to join us. Let me just, is all this clear as mud to y'all?
we have a question
I
back
see
here.
4 or 5. I see Ronnie here that probably understood some of it, and no, he's right over his head too. But it's interesting, very interesting. Leon, okay? You got a question? Wait, hold on just a second where we can hear you.
I realize that the blood stains are, I don't know, degraded or not actual blood residue. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, start over.
Regarding the blood stains, I was wondering about, we've come a long way in recent years on DNA testing. Is there anything that could be done with any of these stains to look at the DNA? I'm not sure what you'd be looking for, but I don't think Jesus' blood would be representative of normal human DNA.
The DNA is very old DNA, and because of its age, it's broken up. At least the status, the last time they were allowed to do scientific measurements on it, they could not get a complete genome, as they call it, genome, on the blood. So there might be better equipment now that could do that. And so that's why, one reason why I'm hoping that scientists are allowed to do further experiments after it goes on exhibit in 2025 to investigate the nature of the blood further. One interesting aspect of the blood, men, if you cut yourselves during shaving, you notice within maybe minutes to hours to days, it turns dark brown to black. But the blood on the shroud has a reddish hue. It's not clear why that's the case. And that question needs to be answered yet. I don't know. We have a question over here.
Love the presentation. I actually have a couple questions. What I think is most pertinent is your hypothesis of the radiation on a burning into the fabric. Can that be replicated in a laboratory, taking a modern fabric and exposing it to the radiation and see if it causes a pattern?
Various individuals who don't believe in the shroud have tried various mechanisms to reproduce the image on the Shroud of Turin, focusing on the face. They've tried various highly creative different ways to reproduce that, and they've always failed. Every attempt to create the image only indicates how it was not done. Okay, the very best process that was used, I read a paper a couple years back that used a femtosecond laser, that is a pulse of energy, a femtosecond long. Now, femtosecond is 10 to the minus 15th second. So you'd have 0, point, and then 14 zeros and a 1. That's how short, what small fraction of a second this pulse would be. And it was an infrared femtosecond laser. And they controlled that by information. In other words, they took a picture of the face and they put it down on a scanner to scan in the information on that image, then fed it to the laser. And using radiation controlled by information, they were able to produce an image that looked like the shroud to our eyes, a macroscopic view. Now, it would not be similar to the shroud microscopically on a small scale, but macroscopically it did. That's the best image production that has been used successfully. But how in the world can you test this? In science, you make a hypothesis and you make predictions. The hypothesis has to be consistent with the evidence that you know is true, but then you make predictions about other things that when tested, you say it should be this way. If it's not, then that disproves your hypothesis. But if it turns out the way you predict, then it increases the credibility of your claim, of your hypothesis. So it goes through that type of a process. So my hypothesis makes various predictions in that as to how you can do some testing. For example, if we put in a very high frequency alternating current in a linen fiber, it should force the electrons to the outer circumference where it then discolors the outer circumference. So that might be one way to make predictions regarding part of it. The other way to test this would be for me to take my nuclear analysis computer code, MCNP, it's called, for Monte Carlo neutron photon. Take MCNP and break down the face into maybe 10,000 by 10,000 regions, emit the neutrons from within the head, let them propagate through the skull and all, and then onto the cloth to see if I can reproduce an image like shown on the cloth. Okay, maybe that's the best I can do.
That's great. The only other question I had was, how did you maintain authenticity in the midst of all of the conspiracy theories around this type of topic? How did you maintain making sure that you were following the truth and not getting lost in left field with all the conspiracy theories?
Yes. The main problem in doing shroud research is people's presupposition against miracles. So that's called philosophical naturalism. So that a person who adheres to philosophical naturalism will automatically say it cannot be due, the images cannot be due to radiation because that has no explanation within our understanding of physics. And I say, granted, but you still have to explain the images. And you can only do that with radiation. And so I have to fight that battle. And so when someone says, right now I'm dealing with an individual who was making claims against radiation forming the image. So I'm writing up probably a 12-page paper as a rebuttal to those claims. It's a continual battle. You have to fight with truth and with logic.
Is there any evidence as to what might have caused an intense pulse of radiation?
Is there anything that might refer to what caused the radiation? Yes, there is. You open your Bible to the Gospels and you read about the resurrection. Okay, now what's involved in the resurrection of Jesus? the body disappears. Now, did the body transfer the mass in the body to energy? According to Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. Well, if you look at my paper number 2 of my 33 papers I've written on shroudresearch.net, that's where I deal with that issue of how the body disappeared. And it did not disappear by the mass of the body, the matter in the body being transferred into energy, because that would create a nuclear explosion 1,000 times larger than the largest nuclear weapon that's ever been exploded. It would not only destroy the cloth, but the tomb and Jerusalem and most of Israel. Okay, so that didn't happen. So in some way, you have to find out, have to find some way for the body to disappear without it destroying everything. And how is that possible? I went to one of the cutting edge theories in modern physics is string theory. Have anyone ever heard of string theory? Okay? Yes. You do some study on this, don't you? Is that right? Yes, okay. There's various string theory. Now, the string theorist is trying to explain the mass of the different particles, why the forces are certain strengths, different aspects of our reality, as well as why certain experiments turn out the way that they do. And there have been multiple different string theories proposed, but they all employ multiple dimensions. Now, we live in space and time. Time is one dimension, goes forward. Space is 3 dimensions. X, Y, and Z coordinate system is 3 dimensions. So the reality that we live in has 4 dimensions. But string theory has to postulate that there actually exists anywhere from 10 to 26 dimensions. Okay? So that our 4 dimensions are a very small subset of the total that probably exist. So that when Jesus disappeared, bam, gone from within the cloth collapsed. But later, they have all the doors and windows closed. Bam, he pops in. Where did he pop in from? Okay? Did he beam in like Star Trek? Right? Did he twinkle first when his body was being recomposed? No, it was instantaneous. He was making a transition back into our 4-dimensional reality from the larger 10 to 26-dimension reality. Okay? And so in physics terms, what Jesus did in the resurrection was he transferred into an alternate dimensionality, which to the observers, if you were standing there in the tomb watching the body, it would simply be gone. And if you were standing there videoing the events in the upper room with the doors and the windows locked, you were videoing everything with a wide-angle lens on it. All of a sudden, Jesus just, bam, and then he was there. Not that he came in through the door or the windows. So what we're talking about here is a transition between dimensionalities. Now, in saying that, your whole body is composed of organs, which are composed of proteins, which are composed of molecules, which are composed of atoms, which are composed of neutrons, protons, and electrons. So in the body making a transition to an alternate dimensionality, that means that all of these neutrons, protons, and electrons have to make that transition too, because they're part of the body. Well, evidently in this process of transition between dimensionalities that was built into the universe before the universe was founded, this is God's forethinking, thinking forward to the creation of the Shroud of Turin, to bring it forth between people when there's soon before Jesus' second coming as additional evidence for the resurrection. This was all built into the physics of the universe from the beginning. So that in order to accomplish this transition between dimensionalities, there must have been a vertical oscillation of the nucleus up and down, with some of the nuclei in deuterium. That would be heavy hydrogen, which only has one proton and one neutron in it. Because that, we're getting a little bit technical, I'm sorry, but when you ask what element, what isotope was it that was splitting, the one that requires the least amount of energy to split is deuterium, or heavy hydrogen. Normal hydrogen just has one proton. Heavy hydrogen has a proton and a neutron. So this the nucleus, nuclei, plural, were evidently oscillating vertically, up and down. And then some of them were splitting, casting protons up, simultaneously neutrons would go down to conserve momentum, and then it would oscillate backwards. We have protons going down